Hey guys, welcome back to Drawn into Narnia. This is going to be episode 3, focusing in on the characters of Prince Caspian. Characters are probably my favorite part of storytelling, so I'm excited about this. And there are a lot of really interesting characters, so let's go ahead and do this. So first character we're going to talk about is the title character, Prince Caspian. So Prince Caspian, or King Caspian as he's called for most of the book, which incidentally, why is this book called Prince Caspian when he's referred to as King Caspian for most of the book? Whatever. He is the rightful heir to the Telmarine throne of Narnia. He is probably around 14, I would say, in this book, because he's depicted as being younger than Peter in this book, who I would say is probably around maybe 15, 16, 17, probably 17, 16, I don't know, somewhere in there. And he's also depicted as being about the same age, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger than Edmund, but definitely closer in age to Edmund than Peter, I would say. But the bigger factor with kind of my belief that he's 14 is the fact that in the next book, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, he's depicted as being old enough to look for a queen, but it's only been 3 years. So he's probably about 17, 18 in that book, maybe 19, probably not, which makes him around 14 in this book, I would say, maybe 15. The result of this is that we have a very young king in the command of a rebel force that is very small, going up against a hugely superior army, both in terms of technology and numbers. That is terrifying. And he does it. He actually manages to successfully lead this army. Yeah, they're losing when help arrives, but given the fact that they are this teeny tiny little army with way worse technology and basically no battle training, I'd say he handles it decently well, especially since a lot of his army, or at least part of his army, Nikabrik is who I'm mostly thinking of, hates him because he's not Old Narnian. And speaking of Old Narnian, probably, for me, the most interesting thing about Caspian, though, is the fact that he's basically the physical embodiment of the collision point between Old and New Narnia. He was raised New Narnian, he was born New Narnian, he is, for all intents and purposes, New Narnian. Society expects him to be fully New Narnian. But he also has a huge amount of respect for Old Narnia, and love for them as well. Which, yes, that's partly because he was raised by a nurse who believed in Old Narnia. She wasn't Old Narnian herself, I don't think, although the book hints she might be part dwarf, so that's possible. And then his tutor, Dr. Cornelius, is, of course, half dwarf. So he had contact with Old Narnia growing up. A lot of it, actually. Probably more so than he did with his uncle, because based on what's described of his relationship with his uncle, Miraz was not a very present guardian. And that was probably good, all things considered, given the fact that Miraz hated him enough to try and kill him the second he had a son of his own. But yeah. And this kind of merging of the two Old Narnian and New Narnian is, I think, part of what makes him a perfect candidate to be King of Narnia after this book ends, because he's one of the very few people who would have equal respect for both sides. Because, yes, he fights on the side of the Old Narnians in this book, but he was raised among the New Narnians. There's no way he's not going to have some level of empathy for them. And besides that, he's a very kind person. So he is a really good choice to be the leader of this. I'm not going to touch too much more on that, but I just wanted to bring it up a little bit because you can't really discuss Caspian without talking at all about his status as the king of the Old Narnians and eventually New Narnians. One of my favorite things, though, in relation to this character in this book, though, is his dynamic with Peter. And this is one of the things that I hate most about the movie. I don't hate the movie as a movie. I actually like it. There are certain things that I think it adapted really well. But one of the things that they did really badly was the dynamic between Peter and Caspian. And that's because in the movie, they're constantly fighting. They basically hate each other for most of the movie, or at least the first chunk. In the book, it's literally the exact opposite. From the moment they see each other, there's this huge respect. Peter, because it's like, you are the rightful king. You are clearly doing, as well as can be expected in this scenario. Better, actually. And I think you have potential to be a very kind, good ruler. On Caspian's side, he basically goes full fanboy mode in the most dignified way he possibly can. He still has his full composure, still refers to with all the correct titles and everything, but you can tell he's just going, oh my goodness, hi King Peter, hi King Peter, oh my goodness, I grew up hearing nursery rhymes about you. And it's really funny. You can tell that he is just in awe of this living legend who is suddenly standing in front of him, which, okay, fair. That would probably be my reaction too. It's a very entertaining scene to watch, or scenes, I guess. Anytime that these two are interacting, it's fabulous. But it also says a lot about Caspian, that despite being starstruck by Peter, he still speaks up about his opinions. For instance, when they are deciding who is going to go and fight Miraz in single combat, his first reaction is, oh, please let it be me, I want to avenge my dad. But he does respect Peter when Peter goes, I have some good reasons why you shouldn't. And so their dynamic is it's entertaining, and it's really, really nice to just see a good friendship in this book. And I love it. Now, I talked in the previous video a lot about how hope is personified in this book. And probably the biggest personification of hope in this book, with the exception of Aslan and maybe Lucy, is Dr. Cornelius. Dr. Cornelius is a half-dwarf who grew up in a world where if anyone had found out he was Old Narnian at all, he would have been executed at best. And yet, despite all of that, he still has hope that Old Narnia will live again and that Aslan is going to save them all. He doesn't know that the Old Narnians are alive. He explicitly tells Caspian that when Caspian goes, "Oh, do you think there are any left?" He just says, "I don't know. Sometimes I think there can't be. But something always happens to start me hoping again." And it's so inspirational. I love Dr. Cornelius. I love the way he's portrayed. I love his dynamic with Caspian. You can tell that he is very much like, yes, I actually have a relationship with the King of Narnia, or the future King of Narnia. Let's try and make him the best king possible, but you can tell he also legitimately cares about Caspian as a person. You can tell he very much loves Caspian. He's probably the nearest thing to a father Caspian has ever had, because let's face it, Miraz is not a paternal figure, and his dad died when he was a baby, so Caspian the Ninth didn't really have a chance to be a father, which is sad. But yeah, Miraz isn't, we're not counting Miraz as anything close to Caspian's dad. Because, yeah, sure, it's like, yeah, you tried for a bit, but even before the murder attempt, okay. But it's kind of implied that Miraz wasn't especially involved in Caspian's life. They would twice a week go and take a walk and talk together, which, okay, that's nice, but it's kind of implied in the scene where we see this that Miraz isn't really listening to Caspian, and also we know that Caspian doesn't especially like his aunt and uncle, and it's also stated later that Pruna Prismia, his aunt, hates him. So he doesn't really seem to have much of a parent relationship with his aunt and uncle. So Dr. Cornelius, he is, for all intents and purposes, Caspian's father, and he takes that position very seriously. Yes, he has huge amounts of respect for him. He respects his title. Kind of reminds me of Alfred and Batman a little bit, except that, with less brooding and more magic. I think that a lot of the places where Caspian actually gets his hope, he does naturally have it, but I think he partly gets it because these two wonderful people, especially Dr. Cornelius, instilled this in him, this hope that, yes, there is a chance for a better future. Aslan is out there. These wonderful things did happen. There is a chance that they can be brought back. Things can be better. And that's really, really beautiful to read about, especially since Dr. Cornelius is not an idiot. He explicitly states, sometimes I think that they can't exist anymore, that the Old Narnians are dead. So it's not that he thinks it's not possible. He's not in denial. He hopes and believes that they are real, and that they do still exist. And that even if the Old Narnians are dead, Aslan is still out there, and things can be made better. And you see this in a scene when Caspian actually says, "What can I do?" I think it's right after he's just found out that Cornelius is half-dwarf. And Dr. Cornelius says, you can be kind to my people, to the people that are left. You can search the woods and try and find them. You can try and make reparations, is basically what he's saying. He has an actual plan, but you can tell that it's because he genuinely believes this is the right thing, and he believes that Caspian is going to be a really amazing king. And it's just so sweet to watch. I love it. Their reunion scene at Dancing Lawn is just adorable. Okay, so the scene where Caspian and Dr. Cornelius reunite, because Caspian, of course, ran away without Dr. Cornelius to escape because it was harder to hide with two people. And then, of course, Dr. Cornelius tracks him down and they're able to reunite at Dancing Lawn. So they haven't actually spoken to each other yet, and the other Old Narnians are currently kind of capturing Dr. Cornelius and bringing him to Caspian to kind of be like, who is this person and why are they here in our secret war meeting? Okay, take my wrists if you like, worthy badgers, but don't bite right through them. I want to speak to the king. So, first of all, he just automatically calls Caspian the king, which, one, he is, so yes, but two, they're in public, so he's kind of reinforcing Caspian's status as king. But it does genuinely show the immense respect he has for Caspian, on both accounts. "Dr. Cornelius!" cried Caspian with joy, and rushed forward to greet his old tutor. Everyone else crowded round. So that automatically shows Caspian, well, first of all, he's genuinely happy to see him, but it's a much more familiar greeting than what Dr. Cornelius was doing. So you can see how close they are here. "This is my greatest friend and the savior of my life," said Caspian. Okay, that's very high praise, and he deserves it. and anyone who doesn't like his company may leave my army at once. You already have a small army. That says a lot. All right. Dearest Doctor, I am glad to see you again. However did you find us out? And then they keep talking. But it's notable that Dr. Cornelius refers to Caspian as your Majesty, the King. Like, the titles are all very, very formal. But it's never really done as this distancing act. It always feels more like it's like, no, I respect you. I'm going to uphold your position. I will always be here to support you. And I just love that. Especially when contrasted with Caspian's side of things, where refers to him as Dr. Cornelius or the Doctor, which are still, more formal titles, but they're more familiar because he's in a position where he can do that, because he's of higher authority. Now, one character I mentioned briefly in that previous scene, of course, is Nikabrik. And Nikabrik is a character that I find kind of divisive for myself. On the one hand, I really dislike Nikabrik. He causes a lot of major problems in the plot. He is, of course, the dwarf who, pretty much from the second he sees Caspian, goes, yep, we need to kill him. He's New Narnian. He has to die. And then that turns into more and more, I guess, sedition against Caspian and his position as a leader. And it culminates in Nikabrik finally going, you know what? The old kings and queens aren't coming. Let's bring back the White Witch. Which we spent the entire previous book trying to get rid of her, and she was worse than Miraz. That's stated pretty explicitly in this book, and given what we see the two sides do, she was worse. She was definitely worse. But his excuse is, not to the dwarves she wasn't. She was better to the dwarves. And that doesn't really change the fact that she was horrible to most of the Narnians. And this really speaks to Nikabrik's mindset. It's very, very us versus them. But it's not just new Narnians and old Narnians. Even within the old Narnians, there's badgers and dwarves. It seems like the only people he trusts are the other dwarves. And even then, he does have a number of clashes with Trumpkin. But he does seem to trust Trumpkin. He just doesn't really get along with him. It's very sad to watch, because it's like, Nikabrik, you have so few people left. There are so few of your people left, so few people who don't want to kill you, and you're alienating them constantly with this mistrust. I understand where it's coming from, but it's very sad to watch. And then he decides to sabotage them by trying to bring back the woman who murdered probably thousands of the old Narnians when she was in control. Because it can't possibly be worse than what we have. Yes, it can. I'm sorry, but it can. The White Witch was so much worse than Miraz. She is literally the representation of Satan in this series. But his desperation is so extreme that he's willing to try anything to get rid of Miraz and to be free of the new Narnians, and it's so sad to watch. That being said, he almost gets a lot of people killed. And so his death scene is like, on the one hand, I'm sad because, as Caspian says, he'd grown sour inside from long years of suffering and hate, and if we went quickly, he may have become a good dwarf in the days of peace. And also that speaks very highly of Caspian, that it's like, okay, 5 minutes ago you tried to, usurp me and bring back the White Witch, and I'm already forgiving you. You probably haven't even finished bleeding out on the floor yet, and I'm already forgiving you. That speaks very highly of Caspian. So yeah, I don't know. I'm very torn with Nikabrik because, on the one hand, I feel bad for you, but on the other hand, you could have caused so much damage, and that kind of is very indicative of the fact that he embodies bitterness. He is the literal embodiment of bitterness in this book, possibly the most extreme example of it in the entire series. And you can tell that C.S. Lewis has a deep understanding of the fact that Nikabrik is responsible for his actions, but that doesn't make it any less of a tragedy. Now on to a much happier tone, and also, incidentally, another example of a character who had to deal with very, very arduous circumstances, even compared to the other characters. Reepicheep the Mouse. But the interesting thing about Reepicheep, as opposed to Nikabrik, is rather than being associated with bitterness or hope or anything like that, he's associated with honor and pride in this book. And throughout the rest of the series as well, but especially in this book, I find. He's a stereotypical fairy tale knight, but he's a mouse as well. And that makes him very, very, it's halfway between adorable and hilarious, because it's this teeny little mouse. I think he's 2 feet high. So, for a mouse, huge, but for anyone else, quite small. And he is very, it's almost like he's compensating for his stature, in that he's being very, very firm in his honor, and he knows exactly what he wants, and he will go for it. For a lot of the book, it's kind of played almost as a bit of a joke, where it's like, oh, haha, Reepicheep, you know, calm down, please. This is not the scenario where a duel is required. But at the same time, it's shown in the end as being quite serious. Reepicheep almost dies in this book because of his desperation to protect his honor. Reepicheep here says, "Sir," said the mouse, "I can eat and sleep and die for my king without one," referring to his tail. "But a tail is the honor and glory of a mouse." And Aslan says, "I have sometimes wondered, friend," said Aslan, "whether you do not think too much about your honor." He doesn't say, don't think about your honor. He says, I think you're thinking about it too much. So basically it's like, yeah, like, care about, you know, like, behave honorably. But you probably shouldn't be caring as much about it as you are, because it's turning into pride. And I love Reepicheep's response here because it's so respectful and dignified, but very much gets his point across. "Highest of all high kings," said Reepicheep, "permit me to remind you that a very small size has been bestowed on us mice, and if we did not guard our dignity, some, who weigh worth by inches, would allow themselves very unsuitable pleasantries at our expense. That is why I have been at some pains to make it known that no one who does not wish to feel this sword as near as hard as I can reach shall talk in my presence about traps, or toasted cheese, or candles. No, no, sir, not the tallest fool in Narnia." And sorry, I love Reepicheep. He's one of my favorite characters in this whole saga. And it's interesting to watch how he cares so much about it, but how it's shifted into something negative. In the end, it basically ends with Aslan going, "Okay, I'll give you your tail back," but it's basically almost like a reminder, where he's just kind of saying, "I'll give you your tail back, but just remember that that's not where your value comes from." And I feel like this is a good parallel for when some people feel like they are not good enough to approach God. This gets talked about a lot in the Bible, actually. But Aslan basically says that's not the point. It doesn't matter if you have the trappings of honor with your tail. That's not a necessity to talk to me. Which I find really touching. Basically everything about the relationship between Reepicheep and Aslan is just wonderful. I love how in the next book you really see how Reepicheep has like this unbridled love and respect for Aslan, and I just love it. And then there's two more relationships I want to talk about, and that is Lucy's relationship with Aslan and Lucy's relationship with Edmund. So first up, Lucy's relationship with Aslan is this very personal in this book, more so than in the first book. In the first book, Aslan has kind of this communal relationship with all four of the Pevensies, and it is really beautiful. But in this book, we have a number of one-on-one moments between Aslan and Lucy. We see these one-on-one conversations. We see Lucy run up to Aslan and basically tackle him. And it's just so sweet to watch. But I like how Aslan does chide Lucy for a couple of things that she does in this book. But he also treats her with immense tenderness and love. And it's basically a situation where he goes, "Did you really have to wait for the others? Could you have come alone?" And then when she says, "Yeah, I could have," then it's like, okay, what can we do to fix this? What do we do now? And then there's so much obvious love between the two of them. You can tell that Aslan really, really cares about Lucy. She's basically his daughter. And you can tell that Lucy, that moment where she runs up to Aslan is the first moment where she and the audience feel truly safe in this book, because nothing can happen to her when she's with Aslan. And her relationship with Edmund in this book is also really interesting. We don't see it as much as we did in the previous book, but when contrasted with the previous book, it's kind of insane how different it is. Because in the first book, of course, Edmund spends a lot of time tormenting his sister. He teases her mercilessly. He can be very cruel, actually. In this book, he's quite kind to her. He's in the scene where they're all discussing whether they're going to go down the gorge to get to the stone table, which turns out to be the wrong way to go, or go up where she thinks she saw Aslan, and she did, but no one else believes her. He sides with Lucy because the last time we disagreed with Lucy, we were wrong, and she was right. And he's the only person to side with her in that scene. So we don't see a ton of this relationship, especially since the kids kind of get split up between boys and girls for a good chunk of the book. But what we do see of their relationship is really sweet, and I love it. So it appears that the last little bit of the footage may have disappeared for some reason. Not sure why. So I'm just going to wrap it up here. Thanks for watching, you guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you want to talk about any of these characters or anything related to it, I'd be happy to do so. And have a fantastic day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.